gremlins! I've decided that I want to try making myself a swimsuit. At the moment, my only swimming option is a plain black long sleeve and plain black athletic shorts, and that's just kind of boring, especially as a person who really likes to dress up and be foresty and everything. But also, it's really hard to find more interesting swimsuits that feel gender neutral. And as someone who is non-binary, that's rather important to me. So I've decided that I'm just going to try making my own. I've never worked with stretch fabric like this before, and I'm sure it's not going to go very well, but I'm determined to figure it out anyway. These are some of the designs I sketched when I first had this idea. And this is the design I'm actually going to go with. I'm starting with just the overalls part, which will have mushroom applique all over it, and pockets that have zippers in them so that I can keep things safe while swimming, that they won't fall out. I am also going to purposely design the pockets so that my phone won't fit in them, so I won't accidentally get my phone wet. This design also does contain a long sleeve with flowy pirate sleeves, but that is a later time project, because for now I can just wear my regular swim long sleeve under this overall set once I've made it. So, let's see how sewing stretch fabric for the first time will go. Come along with me and we'll make a swimsuit. Before I even start trying to actually figure out how to sew the swimsuit plans I have, I need to first figure out what stitch on my sewing machine will work for spandex. So I've cut a strip of my fabric, and I'm going to cut this into little sections and just do experimental seams with any stitch on my sewing machine that looks like it might work and see which one actually will. The first step of this project was frustrating and not particularly interesting. Every stitch I tried had flaws. And worse, the machine seemed to be protesting being used on spandex by constantly snapping the thread. I kept at it though, sewing more and more, adjusting my tension to make the thread snap less, and finally deciding that while it wasn't perfect, there was one stitch that was good enough and consistent enough to not cause holes in the seams and to survive what a swimsuit would be put through. It will also take a lot of thread, but luckily I do have a lot of dark green thread, so that will be okay. What I thought was going to be a fairly easy testing process was not. I ended up even turning my camera off partway through because I just kept having to troubleshoot things. My thread kept snapping, the stitches were uneven. I don't know how much of this is the machine's fault versus the thread's fault versus the fabric's fault. I think I've figured out which stitch I can use. It is this stitch, which is also red D on my sewing machine. It is slightly uneven, the way it's sewing, but it is less uneven than the zigzag stitches are. And I'm hoping it'll be strong enough to deal with what the fabric is going to be putting up with. So we're going to just hope for the best here. This is not off to a great start, I'll be honest, but I'm confident that I can muddle my way through somehow. The next step is actually figuring out the pattern, which will also, I'm sure, be a complication. I'm not following an actual pattern, which is certainly a choice as someone who has only sewn shorts 3 times, all 3 times for the same project because I kept doing it wrong. However, I've gotten better at figuring out patterns for myself since, and I have a few pairs of shorts that fit well to use as a template. I figure the average between the outlines of all these shorts will be the most correct, and stretch fabric should be forgiving about fit. So I traced the shape of the front and back panel of each pair of shorts, then designed my own pattern around those 3 sets of lines. Then, just to be sure, I took my own measurements and made sure the measurements of the pattern lines would fit over my hips, around my waist, and around my thighs. I did end up getting this step correct. The next step was cutting my fabric out. I have 2 meters of dark green spandex, and I shouldn't need nearly this much, but having extra will be a surprise tool that will help us later. My housemate, the house cat, actually bought this fabric for me as a gift for this project, which I'm really grateful for. I traced my pattern pieces onto the fabric with a dark marker and then cut them out. Everything is going well so far. Things start to go wrong when I start sewing, although I didn't realize it at the time. I'm mentioning it now though, so that if for some reason you are following this as a tutorial, do not follow the next few steps. I am doing everything wrong and will realize this eventually. What I'm doing first is pinning and sewing the side seams of each short leg together, which is the correct first step for sewing shorts. I am also once again battling with my sewing machine. The battle never really stops for this whole process, I just get better at knowing what to do. Generally, every time I needed to fix something, I'd turn the camera off until it was fixed, as troubleshooting isn't fun to watch, or do. There were a few times where I'd abandon the project for a few hours or until the next day out of frustration, which is why the sudden change of clothes in the middle of one seam. With the side seams sewn, it's time to attach the 2 legs together, and this is where things go wrong. I'll let you know exactly what I did in a minute or two once I realize, but for now, feel free to try and guess my mistake in the comments. So I finished sewing the shorts bit, and then I went to try them on the mirror, and I made the same mistake I made last time I made shorts, which is I got the bit that's supposed to be the crotch seam and the bit that's supposed to be the inseam switched. So, this bit, which I sewed to be the crotch, is meant to be the pant leg. And vice versa. So I'm going to need to unpick all of this, which is going to be a pain because this is the type of stitches I'm working with. I am genuinely considering, because I did buy enough fabric to be able to make at least one screw up, I am genuinely considering just cutting out more fabric and abandoning this rather than trying to unpick this. So, we're going great. I think I actually am just going to cut out more fabric, because I do not want to unpick all this. This can just live as a testament to the fact that I am not good at sewing pants. I will check in after I've cut more fabric. I don't feel the need to film it twice. As I said, I cut the new fabric off camera, so we returned to the sewing machine with fresh pieces of shorts and a very carefully checked attempt 2 at sewing. I probably would have abandoned the shorts till the next day after this mistake, but I was on a call with the bearded gremlin who I could rant to about the whole situation while I worked to fix it. And also, this day was the best day I had for several hours of uninterrupted filming, without class or the house cat being home and needing to stay out of the camera's way. So I persisted. The side seams were sewn the same, sewing down the long straight side of each leg. Each leg has a front and back piece which are slightly different, but I made sure that the side seams would be the same length on the pattern. Sewing stretch fabric itself isn't as tricky as I expected, but my seams are all a little wonky and warped, and the sewing machine kept throwing a fit, so the entire process was constantly slightly frustrating. Most of the time, the issue was the thread snapping again and again, and needing to be re-threaded. Sometimes the machine would act even worse, eating my fabric to the point where I needed to unscrew the metal plate under the needle to get the fabric back out. I must have unscrewed that plate 5 or 6 times during the full process. I got very efficient at it. I triple-checked that I was getting the next few seams right this time. The shorter, straight seams are the short's legs. The longer, curved ones are the crotch seam. Does that seam have a nicer name that I don't know about? I started with the crotch seam like I did last time, but this time correctly. It was going well until my machine ate the fabric for the first time. Like I said earlier, I got fixing this mistake down to an art by the time I finished. However, this was my first time encountering fabric eaten so thoroughly I couldn't just pull it back out, and I struggled over it for about 20 minutes in total, mostly off camera. Next, I sewed the shorts into a wearable shape by sewing the inseams. Again, correctly this time. And while the shorts aren't finished, they are in a state where I can try them on and reassure myself that I did not screw up this time and can move forward. The shorts are a little too wide for me in the waist, but this is easily fixable, and I don't even need elastic because the fabric I'm making the waistband out of is stretchy. I cut a long rectangle of my fabric out, measured to fit my waist, and once it was sewn into a circle, I pinned it to the top of my shorts, adding darts where needed to get the shorts to fit into the waistband. It took a couple tries to get those darts in convenient places. When I was finally happy, I sewed the waistband in place. In the past, I've mentioned preferring to hand sew waistbands, but for this, I don't want to try hand sewing any part of stretch fabric. And also, I've already accepted that this whole project will look slightly wonky, so I'm willing to save the time and effort and machine sew the waistband. It is by far not the most questionable part of the final pair of overalls. Other than hemming the cuffs, the shorts are done now, and I'm moving on to the bib of the overalls. Helpfully, I've made an overalls bib before, to pin to my cargo pants, and I was able to trace this bib onto my fabric and make a new one of a similar shape and size. I also, while I'm at it, cut out my first pocket, being careful to make sure the top opening is the same length as the zipper I have for it. I decided to attach the pocket to the bib before the bib gets attached to the shorts, since it will be easier to maneuver around the machine. I also decided to attach the zipper to the pocket before everything else, out of necessity so I wouldn't sew the pocket shut attaching it. I did have to sew the zipper twice. Luckily it didn't take too long to unpick, but the first time I was accidentally stretching the fabric as I sewed, leading the seam to be entirely too warped to work. Before trying again, I added basting stitches to keep the fabric in place along the entire zipper so it wouldn't stretch, and that worked. Once again during this process I was on the call with yet another friend, as of yet unnamed, and I was able to rant about the woes of sewing spandex while I fixed my mistake. With the zipper attached properly, I sewed the rest of the pocket down to the bib, then zipped the zipper closed to attach the other side of it as well, so the pocket would stay securely shut while I'm being active or underwater. Again, I used basting stitches first to avoid the pitfalls of attaching spandex to a non-stretch weave. I can keep so many shells and stones safe in this pocket. Before combining the bib and the shorts, I finished the bib's non-attached sides with a simple hem. The fabric doesn't seem to be prone to fraying, so I don't need to roll my hems over themselves, just hide the raw edges from the outside of the garment. At first I attempted to use zigzag stitches for this, since the problems I encountered during my test of skipped stitches and uneven zigzag size wouldn't be as problematic on a hem compared to a seam. And technically, they did work on the hem, well enough for me to move on to attaching the bib to the waistband. However, the zigzag stitches just looked awful. I don't know what my machine was trying to do. So instead, once the bib was attached, I went back over the hems with the seam I've been using everywhere else, and it looked so much better. While the stitches I'm using are practical first and foremost, they do also look quite cool and add a very interesting pattern to all my visible sewing. And zigzag stitches that are glitching just don't look as nice. While I was doing hems anyway, I decided to finish the main body of the overalls with the pants hems, again using using my trusty stitch without even attempting zigzag first. Then I had 2 more pockets to face, made more complicated by the fact that they were being sewn onto already assembled shorts, not a flat piece of fabric. I started with a simple pattern piece measured to fit my zipper, then traced twice onto my fabric. These pockets are designed to be smaller than my phone so that while my phone will still fit in them, they won't zip closed and the corner of the screen will still be visible. Hopefully this will keep me from forgetting my phone is in my pocket and taking it into salt water with me. Also, I ended up basting the entire seam of each pocket before pinning it and sewing it to the shorts, to prevent these pockets from being too warped. The final step of the overalls is adding straps, but I put that step off for a while, first deciding to start on the appliques. The first applique was sewn onto a pocket before the pocket was attached, which is the logical way to do it. The rest were attached in a more complicated way. Normally, I'd recommend sewing appliques or patches to clothing panels before sewing those clothing panels together where possible. It is generally easier to work with flat fabric than fabric that is layered and curved. However, since I wasn't confident in my patterning ability, I wanted to make sure my base idea fit and worked before adding any fancy mushrooms. And given I had to sew the shorts twice, it's a good thing I did this in this order. It does make attaching the mushrooms a little more awkward, but I managed it with less issue than I expected. The first mushroom, the pocket mushroom, is actually 2 simple pale mushrooms cut out of beige spandex. If I could have found some, the caps would have been brown spandex instead, but when I was finding this fabric, beige was the closest I could get. I did combat this by using dark brown thread to attach some of the mushrooms for some contrast. Also, I finally used the zigzag stitch, although it took a few tries to finally obey me, so the first few mushrooms look a bit wonky. But then again, so does this whole project. I'm telling myself it's fine. I also learned pretty quickly that in order to avoid my fabric being eaten by the machine, I had to sew from the middle towards the seams, rather than from the seam toward the middle. Not sure why, but I did what worked. As I edit this video, I'm realizing watching me hunch over a sewing machine for most of a video might not be the most interesting thing. So now I'm curious, do you want to see more sewing content, or do you prefer more varied clothing customization, clothing painting, or just digital art? I will continue to post all of the above, but I'm interested in what projects I should prioritize. Regardless of what I film, I will try to do better at not sticking myself right between the camera and the action so that you can't see what's going on. Another day, a second mushroom. This time, a mushroom using all 3 applique spandex fabrics I bought. White for the bottom half of the stem, beige for the skirt of the stem for contrast, and red for the cap. In my plans, I was also going to either find red and white polka dot fabric, which I didn't, or sew spots on as well, but I decided I didn't want to try sewing tiny circles of spandex and that just a plain red mushroom looked fine, actually. I've already made this project incredibly complicated for myself. I can skip adding spots. My sketch had more mushrooms in it than I ended up sewing, but each mushroom took a while and my machine was continuing to make my life difficult, so I simplified it down to just a couple of each type. With the first toadstool done, I did another simple pale mushroom, also on the shorts hem, and used a dark thread to differentiate the cap and the stem a bit. Then I made a smaller, younger toadstool to sit just on top of the waistband opposite the other, so that there was more than one pop of bright red in this design. An elephant in this room, I way overestimated how much fabric I'd need for each applique color, and given I've currently sworn off spandex for now, I'm not sure when the rest will get used. The next set of mushrooms are some shelf mushrooms, another species I would have used darker brown for if I could have found some when I was searching. Instead, I added brown lines to beige mushrooms to make them look stripy, like many shelf mushrooms are. This is the only time straight stitch appears in this garment, and even then, a more secure form of straight stitch that would survive being on stretch fabric. One more set of shelf mushrooms appear on the back of the shorts, and then the appliques are finished, and it's on to the final step, the straps, which I've been avoiding. Straps are really hard to measure solo, so I had to wait for the house cat to get home so I could get her help. Luckily, with an extra set of hands, it didn't take too long, and soon I was sewing the hems of 2 strips of fabric. Being stretchy, I decided that these hems would be attached at both ends, unlike regular overalls that can unbuckle. In that way, they are more like the straps of a swimsuit, a more femme touch to counter the mask shorts length, and make the whole thing fit neither gender stereotype. When both straps were individually sewn, I sewed one end of each of them carefully to the back of the shorts, positioned so that they can crisscross across my back. I then very carefully made sure the straps weren't twisted, and tried the outfit on in the mirror to check the length of the straps being attached to the front, and pin them in place. With a final stretch of sewing, I finally finished this absolute mess of a project. And here it is, in all its chaotic glory. The swimsuit is done. It was such a pain to sew. It's going to be a long time before I'm willing to sew spandex again. But despite the fact that this is one of the wonkiest projects I've ever sewn, I'm actually quite proud of it. It's very homemade looking, but it's nice, it's comfortable, and it fits the vibe that I wanted it to fit. I can't exactly film reveal footage of me actually using it as a swimsuit. It's a bit complicated to try filming in the pool, especially since I still wear a mask on screen, and I definitely shouldn't do that underwater. But I am going to be trying it out as soon as I can. I also, while I'm talking about pool-related things, want to mention the set of ears and antlers I'm wearing, this is designed slightly different than my normal ears and antlers because the ears are actually attached to the headband with wire, so hopefully they don't fall off in the water. I did this because last time I attempted to swim with my ears on, mostly just because I forgot to remove them, I did lose one to the ocean, so I'm attempting to have that not happen again. But anyway, the design of the swimsuit was supposed to also have a dramatic long sleeve with it, but for now, I do not want to work with stretch fabric anytime soon, and this works fine. The overlayer, the overalls were the more important part anyway, for the general vibe I was going for. And I'm so happy with them, and I'm so ready to test them out. So thank you for coming along on this probably quite frustrating sewing journey, and I'll see you all again in 2 weeks. Bye!